Hi everyone, we've put together this little video just to give you a steer in the right direction when you're installing the Hikvision temperature screening cameras. Just a couple of points to take on board when you're considering the installation. These cameras are designed for an indoor stable environment only. You can't have any installations externally, and the reason for that is the effects that the wind and direct sunlight can have on the temperature measurement can be quite profound. So you need to ensure that first and foremost they're installed indoors, and second of all that it's a stable environment, so you've not got any external entrance doors that are causing wind to blow through into that indoor environment. Second point, make sure you follow the installation parameters. I'm going to show you that on the next slide. There's a couple of different detection distances depending on the camera that you're using, different installation heights, a particular elevation angle that you need to make sure that you ensure to get a nice clear image of people's faces. So again, double check the camera that you're using and make sure that you're following the exact installation parameters of that camera. Point 3, ensure that the preheating period of the device has been observed. So depending on which unit that you're using, there's a period of preheating that needs to be observed to make sure that the camera is given enough time to acclimatise with the ambient room temperature. If you're looking at the turret cameras and the bullet cameras, whether that be the professional range or whether it be the economical range, they require potentially up to 60 minutes of preheating time in order to become stable enough to perform the temperature screening. Looking at the MINMO devices, the access control MINMO, the preheating time on those units is 90 minutes, and if you're using the handheld cameras, the preheating time is 15 minutes. So just make sure you make sure that those times have been observed. Again, point 4, one-way screening channel to ensure you get a clear image of people's faces. So again, we discussed this right back at the start of this temperature screening campaign. You need to really ensure that you can find a way to funnel people towards the camera as people are entering a building, whether that be using barriers or whether it be using a narrow corridor. You need to ensure that people are walking towards the camera as straight on as you possibly can. We're using a face detection feature, so we need to be able to see someone's face nice and clearly. We don't want people passing across the front of the camera and we're only capturing a side profile of their face. We need to get a nice clear image of that person's face. And the same can also be said for the lighting situation. We need to make sure that the environment's got sufficient lighting and also stable lighting to ensure that the camera's got the best possible chance of getting a nice clear image of people's faces. The face detection algorithm isn't going to work if the camera itself can't see the person's face. So we need to get a nice clear image of someone's face using the appropriate angle and also the appropriate lighting. And the last point, right down at the bottom there, try and avoid having high temperature sources in the background of the camera. So if you've got a radiator directly behind someone's head when they're being screened, that could potentially lead you to problems with false alarms, or TV monitors in the background, or any sort of heat source whatsoever could cause you a potential false alarm if the camera was to accidentally pick up that heat source rather than the person's forehead. So just take that into consideration. Try and ensure that you've got as sterile an environment as you possibly can for the temperature screening. So here's a little table of the installation parameters that I just mentioned previously there. So depending on which camera that you're going to be installing will determine, one, the actual detection distance that's able to be achieved with that camera. It will affect the installation height, and it will also dictate how far the black body calibrator needs to be from the camera if you're using a black body calibrator. So you can see down the left hand side there, we've got a couple of different part numbers. The eco range, whether that be the 3mm option or the 6mm option, and you can see the different detection distances with the different installation heights and black body installation distances as well. So these are things that you need to make sure that you're observing when you're installing your camera. What you don't want to have is a situation where you're trying to install, for instance, a 6mm camera, which is only able to measure temperature accurately between 1.5 and 3 meters, but you're trying to measure someone's temperature 5 or 6 meters away from the camera, because it's not going to work. You've got the wrong camera essentially, and you'll need to go back and change the actual camera for one of the professional range in order to ensure that you can measure temperature at that distance. Couple of bits of troubleshooting. So this is just for scenarios where you're getting some problems, whether the temperature screening is not accurate or the camera's not behaving the way you would expect it to do. What we would ask you to do is just follow these 6 steps just to make sure that you've double checked everything, if you like, before you give us a call. So first point, ensure the environment is suitable. Again, make sure that's an indoor stable environment only. You've not got any wind blowing through, there's not a door open which is causing a strong gust of wind to blow through, you've not got direct sunlight being able to enter the field of view of the camera, and you've not got any heat sources in the background of the field of view of that camera. Point 2, ensure the firmware has been upgraded to the latest version. That's a really key point, whether that be temperature screening or any IP system. You need to make sure that the firmware is as up to date as it can possibly be. A lot of issues that you come across with kit can be resolved with upgrading the firmware. Different issues and bugs that are obviously present within a device are rectified using firmware, so we need to make sure that the firmware is as up to date as it possibly can. I'll show you that in a couple of minutes, how to check that. Point 3, ensure the detection distance and heights are within the specified range. So again, just make sure you follow the installation parameters there, and you're not trying to use a camera that's not capable of meeting the distances or the installation heights that you're trying to achieve. Point 4, after 60 minutes preheating, so after the preheating time, make sure that the environmental temperature of the camera matches the ambient room temperature. So I'm going to show you that within the settings of the camera, where you can actually check what if you like, the core temperature of the camera is. So there's a little thermometer built into the camera which is measuring the ambient room temperature. You just need to double check that your ambient room temperature matches what the camera is measuring, and at that point you're then good to observe temperature screening from that point onwards. Point 5, check that the configuration parameters are correct. Essentially, make sure that you follow every setting to a T. Make sure you double check them before you give us a call. It could be something just as simple as one box has been left unchecked and you've not noticed it, so just make sure you double check before you give us a call. And last but not least, point 6, if you are finding that you're getting inaccurate temperature measurements, just double check with a couple of different people to make sure that the inaccurate reading isn't actually a true alarm. You've not actually got someone with a high temperature. It does happen, it has happened already, so just make sure that you're measuring people's temperatures with multiple different test targets, if you like. Okay, so we'll move on to the setup here. I'm just going to change the page over and jump across into our web browser. So this is the login screen for one of our temperature screening cameras. It looks very, very similar to every Hikvision device that you'll find. It's the exact same login screen for every device. So when you first take the camera out of the box and you power it up, you are going to have to activate the camera. Most of you who have dealt with Hikvision devices before will be more than capable of activating a device. Activating a device involves you having to create your own unique password for the device before you can actually proceed to enter the configuration steps. So once you've done that, open up a web browser, whether that be Internet Explorer, Chrome, Firefox, whatever you want to use. Stick in the IP address of the device and that will bring you to this page here. So once we've done that, we're going to log in. So username admin and then the password being whatever you're using for your password. Once I've done that, as you can see, you come straight into the live view of the camera, and you can see up on the left-hand side there, we've got two channels, which is your optical channel and your thermal channel, because it is a bi-spectrum camera we're using. It's got those two cameras built into the unit. If I click on the play button down the bottom here, you can see you've got both of those available to you. So this is the optical camera, and this is the thermal camera. From here, we can go along the top into configuration. Will bring us into the local screen in the first instance. So before we get started going through the actual configuration, what I want to do is double check that we are using the most up-to-date firmware. So to do that, what I'm going to do is go across into System. That will bring me into System Settings. This gives us all the information that we need for this particular device. And the thing that I'm most interested about is the firmware version, which in this particular instance is version 5.5.26, build 200624. So that's a build from the 24th of June 2020, and that is, I believe, still the most up-to-date. In order to check if you've got the most up-to-date firmware version, what you can do is use the Hikvision download portal. So if I move across this tab here and go into Google, you can type in Hikvision UK download portal. One of the first search results you'll find is download portal United Kingdom. If you click on that, and then from there you can select on portal, then product firmware, and we've, just to make it easy for you, we've kept all the temperature screening stuff right at the top. So into temperature screening, and then what you're looking for is the temperature screening camera firmware, which is the one right down at the bottom here. And then baseline firmware for the 12XX and the 26XX, which is the turret and the bullets. And you can see here we've got the list of firmwares from right from the start of 17th of March, right down now, which is the latest version down at the bottom here, 5.5.26 build 200624. So if you were to download that and then upgrade the firmware of the camera just to make sure that you've got the most up-to-date firmware, that takes out any little issues that we've identified over the last 2 or 3 months and gives you the most high-performing camera that you can possibly get your hands on. So just to jump back across into the web configuration of the camera. So these are the steps I'm going to get you to follow if you can. So first and foremost, if you can jump into the local on the left-hand side of the tree here, there's 4 points that we need to make sure that are enabled on this screen. First and foremost, it's the rules. We need to make sure that the rules are enabled. Next 3 are display rules info on capture. Make sure that is set to yes. Display temperature info is set to yes, and display temperature info on capture is set to yes. What that's going to do is basically allow you to view all of the rule information on the web page. So that would be the bounding boxes, that would be the temperature information being displayed above your head, that would be the detection boxes, so on and so forth. That's something that will now be visible on the web page. So when you're doing your testing, you're able to see all that information. If you hadn't selected these, you would come to test the camera and you'd find that you wouldn't see any temperature information and not necessarily think it's working. So that's why we're doing that. What you'll find as we go through a lot of these settings, when you've got your camera in front of you, what you will find is the majority of these settings that we'll discuss are actually pre-configured for you already when you take it out of the box for the first time and you upgrade that firmware. But it's always good practice just to double check and make sure these things are enabled so that you don't come a cropper when you're trying to demo this to a customer. So from local, what we'll do is go into system and then into maintenance. If you go up along the top here, you've got VCA resource type. So within VCA resource type, you just need to ensure that the temperature screening selection has been ticked. There are 2 modes for this camera. It's temperature measurement or temperature screening. If you didn't have this selected as temperature screening, the accuracy wouldn't be as high. So just make sure that you've got that selected, which it should be. From there, we can then jump all the way down to the bottom and go into temperature screening. Okay, so in temperature screening, the first page we come to is basic settings, which is where you really want to start. So there's a couple of things here to make sure that you select. You don't have to worry about every setting. I'm only going to talk about the settings that are really important or the key settings. So first things first, make sure that enable temperature measurement is ticked. Make sure display temperature info on stream is ticked. We can ignore the next 2, add original data on capture and add original data on stream. We don't have to worry too much about these. You can leave them ticked or unticked, it's not a big problem. Make sure the display temperature and alarm info is ticked. We can ignore these 4 here and then move down right to the bottom here, the target thermographic parameters. So the emissivity is going to be the reflective value of the surface that we're trying to measure, which in this instance is human skin. And the agreed parameter for human skin is 0.98. So that should already be pre-configured in there. The distance mode should be left as self-adaption. That's to allow the camera to sort of suss out how far away from the camera you are. And the setting right down at the bottom is if you like, the desired distance for temperature measurement. Now that's going to vary depending on which camera you're using. Today I've got a 3mm turret camera set up, which means that the detection distance range for this camera is between 0.8 and 1.5 meters, which is why I've selected the distance in that box to 1 meter, because that's, if you like, the optimal detection distance. But if you were using, let's say, a 10mm camera, the detection distance is between 2 and 7 meters. So your optimal distance for detection might be set at, say, 4 meters in that particular instance. It really depends how you're setting up your screening channel. But the reason we have to put a distance in there is just in case the distance mode, the self-adaption distance mode, fails to detect how far away you are, it'll automatically resort to that set distance that you stick in the box at the bottom there. Okay? Once you've done that, click on Save. From there, what we can do is go up to the top here and change from basic settings into temperature screening configuration. And as soon as I do that, it's going to immediately bring me into channel camera number 1, which is the optical camera within the unit itself. So you've got 2 channels here. We're going to start on channel 1, which is, again, the optical channel. So a couple of things to pay attention to in here. We've got enable face detection, and we need to make sure that's ticked to make sure the face detection algorithm is working. Upload captured face image, I've got that ticked. You need to have that ticked if you're going to use the camera along with an NVR, so that the camera will actually send the snapshots of people's faces to the NVR to allow it to play on the target detection section of the recorder. Moving down, we have the overlay information. So this is the information that's going to be embedded into the video. So display temperatures, you obviously want to be able to display the temperature above people's heads. Display each frame, so that's either the green or the red box around someone's face to show whether or not they have a normal or abnormal temperature. And also you've got the face temperature, which is going to display that temperature just above their head, just above that box. It will show you exactly what their live temperature is. Third option here, which I've left unticked, but it's entirely up to yourself whether you choose to use it, is display face temperature position. That's a little crosshair which will display exactly where on the forehead your temperature is being measured from in that precise moment. So it doesn't improve performance, it's simply for information rather than performance. Once you've done that, we're going to move down to the right hand side here. You've got alarm when temperature is above and pre-alarm temperature. So these are the parameters that you can configure for when you want the system to actually generate an alarm. So I've set the alarm temperature as 37.8 for today's demonstration. You can change that to whatever you see fit. Obviously, every end user might have a different idea as to what they would see as an acceptable alarm temperature. And then you've got the pre-alarm temperature, which is, I guess, a personal preference whether you choose to use a pre-alarm. In this instance, I'm choosing not to use a pre-alarm, so I've set the pre-alarm temperature up at 45 degrees Celsius, really just to keep it out of the way, but you can set that, say, maybe 37.5, and you can receive a separate notification if someone's temperature exceeds 37.5 but below 37.8. It's entirely up to yourself whether you choose to use it. But as I say, today I'm choosing not to use it, and hence why I've set that up at 45 degrees. Once I've done that, I'm going to move down to the live view here. I'm going to select on this tab here for draw area. That's going to allow me to adjust the actual detection area where I'm going to measure someone's temperature. So you can see within this live view here, I've got 2 boxes, which has confused quite a few people. A lot of people are wondering why is there a red box and a yellow box. So the red box, just to give you a bit of information, the red box is the field of view of the thermal camera. Obviously an optical camera has a much wider field of view of a thermal camera, so why we've put the red box there is to give you an indication as to where you can actually measure temperature within this optical image. You can't measure temperature out with the field of view of the thermal camera, because ultimately it's a thermal camera that's doing the temperature measurement. So you need to make sure that your detection area lies within the red box, or ultimately you're not going to be able to measure temperature whatsoever. So that's an idea as to why the red box is there. Your yellow box is your detection area, so that's the box we can actually adjust. So if I select control area and then click on this yellow box, as you can see, you get little dots in the corner, which allows us to then adjust that, move it around to whatever size we see fit. I'm going to just leave it as is because it's perfect. The detection area that I've got it set as, leave that there. Click on save, that will adjust ever so slightly. Other options we've got in here is the maximum and minimum pupil size. So this is something that I would definitely advise you to use. It's a little bit difficult to do on your own. You might need to borrow the help from a colleague or from a customer just to set this up. But what it basically allows you to do is adjust the distance in which the camera will try and measure your temperature. Now, if you're like me today, you're using a 3mm camera, the maximum distance you want that camera to be measuring someone's temperature is 1.5 meters, because ultimately out with that, further than 1.5 meters, we cannot guarantee the accuracy of the temperature measurement. So you don't really want the camera to start measuring temperature any further away. If I was to be standing against the door that you can see in front of you, I would be comfortably 4 to 5 meters away from the camera, which is not going to be any use if it's trying to measure my temperature at that distance, because it's going to be completely inaccurate. So we can use the minimum and maximum pupil size to adjust exactly when the camera chooses to measure our temperature, and we do that by basically standing somebody within the field of view of the camera, and we stand them at the distances that we want to measure temperature. So for instance, if we're looking at the 3mm camera, between 0.8 and 1.5 meters is the detection distance. So what I would do is have someone standing at 0.8 meters distance from the camera, and I would then select the maximum pupil distance size. Select on that, and then select this box up here, which is the max box. I would then have that person stand in front of the camera, and then I would adjust this box. I'd basically place this box in front of their face, so that the 2 points in this box, the width of this box is the same as the width between that person's eyes. Ignore the actual length of the box. We're really just worried about the width of the box. It really should just be a line. Why we've made that box, I don't know, but it should just be a line. You just want to have that as the width of the distance between someone's eyes, so that if anyone walks any closer to the camera, it will stop measuring their temperature. And exactly the same can be said for the minimum. But what you would do for the minimum is ask that person to stand a little bit further back, maybe at 1.6 meters, and then select on your minimum pupil distance. Then select on the minimum box, and again, just place that in front of their face and make sure the width of that box is the same sort of width as the distance between the person's eyes. And what you'll find is the camera itself will then stop measuring temperature when they're standing any further back. And I'll give you a little demonstration of that happening in a few minutes as well, all right? Once you've done that, click on Save. From there, we're going to change the channel number. We're staying on temperature screening configuration, but we're going to change the channel number from camera 1 to camera 2. And this is now changing some of the parameters within the thermal camera of the unit. So again, same overlay information that we had before. Just make sure these are checked. So display temperature is checked, face frame is checked, face temperature is checked, and again, you can choose whether or not you want to display the face temperature position. It's entirely up to you again. If you weren't using a black body calibrator, we would leave this section entirely. We would just make sure that the black body correction tab was unchecked. And what we would need to do is just make sure that the body temperature compensation box was enabled. So check that box. Make sure the compensation type is set as auto, the manual calibration is set as 0, and the environmental temperature mode is set as auto. So I discussed within the presentation slides at the start of this video that we needed to pay attention to the environmental temperature. So that's related to the thermometer that's built into the camera, which is measuring the ambient room temperature, which allows you to coincide that with the core temperature of the camera. So that little box down at the bottom there is your environmental temperature. So what you need to ensure is that that number there matches up with what the temperature of the room that you're in at that precise moment is. As soon as those two numbers match close enough, then you're then good to obviously proceed. Ultimately, the preheating time of that camera has elapsed, and you're now good to start using the camera for temperature screening. For today, the environmental temperature 23 degrees, which is about accurate. It's actually 22.8 degrees on the thermostat in here, so it's not a million miles away from the actual ambient temperature of this room. If you were using a black body calibrator along with your installation, what you would need to do is just check the box for enable black body correction. Set the distance that the calibrator is away from the camera, so that's going to vary depending on which camera you're using. Again, you can refer back to the installation parameters table, which will give you the exact detection distances for the black body correction device. I'm using a 3mm device today, which requires the calibrator to be 1 meter away from the unit, so that's why I've inputted 1 meter in this particular example. The temperature which is being emitted from the calibrator, which by default is set as 40 degrees Celsius, so you can leave that as is. That's what the calibrators will become pre-configured for. And then the emissivity value, again, should be 0.97, which is the accepted value of the surface of the calibrator, so you can leave that as is. Once you've done that, you need to select this little dot to be within the face of the blackbody calibrator. To do that, just click on Draw Area, and then just one click of the mouse in the centre of the blackbody calibrator and click on Save. Once you've done that, we can move along into the linkage methods. So just click on the tab right at the top here. That's going to take us into the Armament Schedule in the first instance. So this is just basically as and when you want the temperature screening to be active. Most people are going to want it 24/7, and that's what it's pre-configured for, so you can leave that as is. What you're really interested in is the linkage method. So this is, if you like, your cause and effect. Should an alarm be triggered, what do you want to happen? Come in here, a couple of things you can enable. So Notify Surveillance Center is probably the most important one. Notify Surveillance Center is our, if you like, push notifications. So that's going to allow you to send the alarms from the camera to the NVR, from the camera to IVMS 4200, the client software, or from the camera to the Hike Connect app. So that gives you really your alarm notifications from camera to endpoint, if you like. Other options you may have if you're using the Eco series, you've got the option for the flashing alarm, which is strobe light on the front of the camera, and also an audible warning, which is the built-in speaker, which will allow you to play that pre-recorded message if someone was to trigger an alarm. Once you've done that, click on Save, and at that point you're good to go with regards to your temperature screening. The camera is now essentially set up and good to go. A couple of little key points just to show you before we move on to a demonstration here. So if I select on face capture, what you'll probably find now is when you're standing in front of the camera, if you're not wearing a face mask, the camera's probably shouting at you, telling you to wear a face mask. If you're choosing not to use that functionality, if you don't require a face mask on the site that you're at, you need to obviously go and turn that setting off. So to do that, into face capture down at the bottom left hand corner here, and then into advanced configuration. And if you scroll right down to the bottom here, you'll have this section here for no wearing mask linkage. And you'll find that this box here, which is the audible warning, it will be checked by default. So if you just uncheck that and click on Save down at the bottom, you will find that your the message to wear a face mask will stop. Other things to show you as well is within event, and then in the basic event, you'll find that you've got control over the flashing alarm and the audible warnings if you're using the Eco series. So if you go into the flashing alarm light output, you can change how the light actually operates, whether it's a flashing light or whether it's a solid light. You can choose how long the actual duration of the flash would be or how long the light stays on for. By default, set it's 5 seconds. And how fast do you want the flashing to be, whether it be low, medium or high speed. You can also adjust the brightness of the light. It is already pretty bright to start off with, but you can increase that brightness if you so wish. And within the audible alarm output, you've got a couple of different options here. You can select which warning you want to play based on different languages. So the alert so far is just in English, is temperature is abnormal, please check. You can now change this within this latest firmware. You can change the sound type from a warning to custom audio, which then gives you the option to upload your own customized audio file so that the camera will automatically play that message for you when someone triggers an alarm. And last thing I want to show you is if we just go into image over on the left hand side here, and if we just change the channel number up at the top here from channel 1 to channel 2, and if I just drop this menu down for image enhancement, you will find this section in here, which is palettes. So you'll probably be thinking at this precise moment, how come the thermal image on this camera is a different colour to mine? I've just changed the palette of the camera that I'm using today. So what you'll find is your camera will look a little bit like this. So that's called white hot. So it's just basically changing the aesthetics of the view, if you like. It doesn't change the performance of the camera in any way, shape or form. It just changes how the camera actually displays different levels of heat. So I've chosen in this particular example just to use this one here, which changes it to look a little bit, personally I think a little bit more professional. So Again, it's up to yourself whether you choose to change that or leave it as is. Okay, so if we just jump across back onto the live view of the camera, click on play, just change that to full screen. So what I'll do is I'll go and stand in front of the camera. You should measure my temperature. It's usually roughly between sort of 36 and 36.5 degrees. So fingers crossed I've not got a high temperature today. And what I'll do is I'll also take a couple of steps back, and you'll see that the camera will stop measuring my temperature because I've used that minimum and maximum pupil distance size. So that gives you an idea as to exactly how that works. Okay, so you should see temperature was measured as soon as I stepped in front of the camera, but when I did take that couple of steps back, I obviously stopped measuring my temperature until such times as I came forward again. So that's what using the minimum and maximum distance will give you, which essentially just makes the system perform that little bit more effectively. Okay guys, so what I'll do now is I'm going to just jump across onto our client software. So jump across onto IVMS 4200, and this is just going to give you a quick run through as to how to add the camera into IVMS 4200 if you want to use the client software for monitoring. And I'll also show you exactly what you get if you generate an alarm using the software, so what pop-up notifications you get when you're using the software. So if I come through into the dashboard, this is what you'll see for the first time if you either install the software or open it up. This is the main dashboard. So what we want to do from here is go into device management over on the right hand side. And what you'll see, I've already got the camera online, obviously, on this particular demonstration, but just to give you an idea of how to add a new device, you've got two options. You can either select on add, which you'll see gives you this option on the right hand side. You can put in the name, IP address, username and password if you've got all that information to hand, and click on add. That'll bring the device online right away. Alternatively, if you're not sure about the IP address, what you can click on is the online device option. Down the bottom here, you will be able to see all the devices that are currently sitting on the same network as the PC that you're using the software on, and you can just select on one of them, click on add. Again, create a name for the camera, username, password, and click on add, and that will bring the device online exactly the same way as I've got here. So you can see, I just drop that back down again. Eco Turret, I've given the name as Eco Turret, part number, and the device is shown as to be online, which is great. So if I just close down the maintenance and management tab, and what I'll do is go across into the main view. So you can see down in the tree on the left hand side here, we've got the camera with both channels. So if I drag that across, see there again, optical camera and the thermal camera. Double click on one of them, it allows me to bring up the full view of it. So what I'm going to do is just simulate a elevated skin surface temperature using a cup of hot water. Unfortunately, it's the only way that I can really simulate it today. So I'll do that just to give you an idea of exactly what the pop-up notification would look like on IVMS 4200. Just to ensure that you're going to get the pop-ups, you need to make sure that you've not got the option disabled for pop-up notifications. So just down in the bottom left-hand corner here, you can see this little tab, which looks like an image of a mountain range. And if I click on that, you can see it just puts in a little circle with a cross through it, which is telling me that the pop-up notifications is disabled. If I click on it again, it will remove that little cross, and that means pop-up notifications are enabled, and I'll receive them when I activate them. So just going to simulate an elevated skin surface temperature to give you an idea of what to. Okay guys, so there you can see pop-up notification comes up with the live view of the camera, and also obviously your alarm snapshots as well. So I double click on one of the snapshots, you can see the alarm information there, 59.6 degrees Celsius. double click on that again there. You've also got the information, the current temperature 59.6 and what your set alarm temperature is at 37.8 as well. So that's what your pop-up notification would look like. Okay guys, so thanks for joining us for this video. I hope you found it useful. Stay tuned for further videos to come. Have a good day. See you later.